Welcome to our May webinar. I'm Roger Firman from the UK Association for Accessible Formats, and I'm very pleased to be in conversation with Jane Black, Business Development Manager of Crawford Technologies, one of our members. Jane, a very warm welcome. Glad you could be with us today.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here, Roger.
Thank you. Jane, wonder if you could tell us about Crawford Technologies, how it started, and in broad terms, where it has positioned itself today in the market.
Yeah, of course. So Crawford Technologies has very humble origins. It actually began as a one-person startup in Canada back in 1995, in the basement of our current president and CEO, Ernie Crawford's house. So back then, he was focused on developing software tools that would enable companies to convert their printed documents from one print language into another so that they could be printed on other large production presses. And the tools that he developed back then subsequently evolved from simple, what in the industry are called transforms, into more complex tools that could not only convert those documents into a different print language, but would enable additional information to be added into them as well. So that might be things like adding barcodes to help direct the documents to a particular print or mailing machine, or by adding other information such as marketing messages that were personalized for the end customer, things like that. So those are our origins, working with organizations that produce sort of high volumes of documents and that needed to get them out to their customers in the most efficient way and in the most optimal format. But obviously over the last 27 years, a lot has changed in the world of customer communications, including things like the demand for faster time to market, wanting to get things out quicker, greater regulatory requirements and new and different communication channels. And so Crawford Tech has evolved too from what was in the beginning what we would probably call a post-composition point solutions business, so trying to solve particular business problems with a particular piece of software, and we've moved from that into developing tools, developing platforms. So we've moved from being a point solution business into a leading platform provider, and our software platforms still help our customers optimize and improve how they communicate with their customers, but they also help them solve more complex problems as well, including things like loading and retrieving documents into and from digital archives and content management systems, automating and orchestrating their document workflows and helping them deliver those documents via different digital channels that have emerged too, and ensuring that that delivery is secure, but also in an accessible format as well. So those are new things that we now do. And you'll be pleased to hear that we're not run out of Ernie's basement anymore. That's not where I'm sitting. We now have offices around the world, including offices here in the UK, and we're now servicing thousands of customers across 5 continents, and including some things like some of the world's leading banks, healthcare providers, insurance companies, utility companies, people like that. So that's really a sort of potted history, I guess, of where we started and where we've got to.
Jane, thank you. So it's a fascinating journey, isn't it, when you think of how such businesses, like there have been many over the time that start in the basement or the garage, the spare bedroom. So it's really a fascinating story. I wonder if you could paint a verbal picture of what tools or platforms the company has and how that links into what its customers use.
Yeah, sure. So we have 3 main areas of focus as a company. We have what we call our output management solutions. We have our e-delivery now platform. And then what I suspect would be of most interest to your listeners is our Accessibility Now platform. And accessibility is, in fact, the fastest growing area of our business these days. And so to paint a picture of what our Accessibility Now platform is, it's a complete platform for the creation and management of accessible documents. So the platform itself leverages high levels of AI and automation. It can be integrated into any existing environment within a company, and it includes within it a range of software solutions and tailored services that are designed to meet the different document accessibility needs of all different types of organizations. So whether those are large or small, or whether they're in the private sector or the public sector. So whether as an organization you would produce what we would call transactional documents, so those are highly structured documents full of variable data that companies would typically produce in very high volumes. So that would be something like, for example, a bank statement or a utility bill. Or whether you produce a different type of document, which we would call a static document, which is typically a one-off document that's individually authored, and maybe something like an information sheet or a fact sheet or a marketing document, something that might appear on your website or something like that. Or whether you produce types of documents that are essentially a hybrid of the two, our Accessibility Now platform can help you find and locate those documents. So that's the first step. It can help you test and validate them. So that's step 2. And then ultimately it can support the different processing requirements of all of those varied types of documents that you might have as a business, so that they can be easily converted into multiple accessible formats. And that can be digital formats such as accessible PDF and accessible HTML, and also what you and I might call traditional formats such as Braille, large print or audio. And I think the key, if I was to say what's the key to the success of our Accessibility Now platform, I think it's a combination of both our expertise technically, but also the breadth of what the platform can do. That means that we've made this a sort of painless process for companies to engage with, which makes them much more willing to make a strong commitment to accessibility. And ultimately, that's great news for people that need alternate formats or use assistive technology to access their communications or to access information and services.
It's interesting. So do customers have the actual platform on their own system, or is this something into which they link at Crawford Technologies to make all those transactions?
Yes, so we have a range of options available to people. So yes, they can either have the platform on their premise, so within their own sort of infrastructure, technological infrastructure within their company. They can have access to it in a private cloud. They can have access to some services if they want to engage with us directly into some of our service centers. So there's a real range of options. It's incredibly flexible, because not one size fits all, if you know what I mean. So,
yes, definitely. I could kind of envisage that it might have to be like that, and different people will want different things, won't they? And if you're a small business, that you would want one solution. If you're a larger business, you'd perhaps want it to be linked into what you have on your own premises and how you work as a business. So yes, yeah. Excellent.
Yeah, absolutely. And depending on security consideration
Yes.
and also your infrastructure, whether you are capable of running this or whether you want to run it somewhere else. Yeah, there's lots of different options. We've tried over the years to become as flexible as possible so that we can accommodate just about what anybody wants.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you, Jane. I wonder whether you'd like to say something about your own involvement in Crawford Technologies.
Yeah, sure. So I started with Crawford Tech back in early 2015. And I was new to the software industry at that point. So when I started, I initially worked across multiple areas of the business, learning, about what we did and particularly how we helped companies solve different business problems that they had. But very soon after joining, I became interested in what we were doing around document accessibility. And Crawford Tech itself started sort of developing their capability in that area probably about 13 or so years ago, so long before I joined. But my arrival coincided with quite a lot of things that were going on in the world of accessibility. So in North America, you had things like the Section 508 stuff was going on, and you also had the sort of beginning of document accessibility legislation and standards in Europe as well, and so it all sort of became very much in my focus within a couple of years of joining the company. And I think what made me, if I was to reflect on it, I think what made me so interested in our accessibility solutions was a combination of two things. So I think, first of all, you had my inner geek. So I've always been interested in understanding how things work, understanding what's possible with them. And with this particular area, it was wanting to understand, what's possible now with the sort of new and emerging technologies that we've got. So that was sort of part one, that, it was very, very interesting to me to understand how we were doing what we were doing. But also it was something that I'd always been interested in sort of my whole life, even as a sort of angry teenager, and that is in causes that sort of fight for equality and for fairness and I guess what these days might be called social justice. And this seemed like it was the perfect way to combine both of those factors, and it could be my actual job. So it was a great sort of combination of all of those things. So I started to get more involved with document accessibility, with our solutions, and ultimately with the Accessibility Now platform. And I have in fact now become the subject matter expert for accessibility in Europe for Crawford Tech. And what that really means is that I've got a reasonable understanding of the market drivers for accessibility in this region, an understanding of the legislation that covers this area, and also an understanding of how our solutions can be applied in different business settings. And it's really great to be involved in an area of the software industry that is actually making a real difference in the lives of people.
Absolutely. And there's, as you say, there's quite an amount of that going on within Europe at the moment, with various legislation coming to fruition.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
A never changing landscape.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Excellent. So as a UKAAF member, does this keep Crawford Technologies in the loop about UK activities, and does that fit globally with Crawford's involvement with other equivalent organisations?
Yeah, definitely. So I think it's important for us to be involved with a range of accessibility organisations, both in Europe and in North America, and for a number of reasons. Firstly, with other sort of accessibility service providers, it's always good to be able to share knowledge and experience. Or I say accessibility service providers, but I actually mean accessibility service providers and advocacy groups and people like that. It's always good to be able to share knowledge and experience with other people that work in the same area as you. So you can stay informed about what's happening in the market outside of your own kind of little bubble that we all get in when we work in a particular area. But also it's proved good for business too. So we have formed some fantastic working partnerships with other accessibility providers. We're all very complementary to each other in terms of what we provide, and we've been able to work in collaboration with a number of them on a range of accessibility projects. But then secondly, when it comes to standards organisations, so whether that's people like yourselves in the UK, whether that's people like the Braille Authority of North America, or even the PDF Association, or the World Wide Web Consortium, all of which we're also members of. We've always thought of our involvement in these as really an imperative based on what we do. So we do sit on a number of the boards and technical committees of these organisations, to keep us informed so that we can continually be improving and updating our platforms to keep up with evolving standards and developments in this area. And then also B, so that we can contribute to the actual development of those standards themselves. So yeah, it's highly important for us to be involved with standards organisations, and we do so with many organisations around the world.
Indeed, as you say, an ever-changing landscape and new things coming along, either short-term, medium-term, and even long-term. I mean, particularly, it could be interesting to see where AI takes us in the next few years, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
So in terms of the future, if you were to look into your crystal ball, what might you predict, hope for, or perhaps even expect?
So I've never been either a betting person or a crystal ball gazer, but I'll give it my best shot. Sorry.
Fine.
So I guess predict, hope for, and expect. So I guess if I take those in the opposite order, so in terms of what I would expect to see, I guess I really do have a belief that digital services and communications are so important for the global economy that more and more is going to be done over the coming years to ensure that everyone has equal access to these for economic reasons, if nothing else. So as well as seeing more improvements to our digital infrastructure, I guess I would also expect to see either more legislation or the further development of legislation or more official guidance around, how to properly engage with all different types of customers so that everyone is included properly in the digital world. And I guess that probably leads me into what my hope would be, which is that barrier-free communication, so whether we call it accessible documents or whether we call it, accessibility as a whole, or what I would like to call barrier-free communication sort of methods and channels, I really hope that becomes business as usual, and that it's a sort of business as usual practice for all organisations and not an exception. And to borrow from the cheekily, Roger, from the UKAAF tagline, that soon every document is an accessible document. So, that would be my hope, I think. And then I guess predictions, as I say, I'm not so, I wouldn't like to be held to any predictions. I guess the only thing that I can really predict is what I know we'll be doing here to make that sort of future possible. And that's kind of to continue to develop and improve the Accessibility Now platform, really so that we are able to provide our solutions into more and more organisations in this area.
Jane, what you said is so true, and I think many of us would wholeheartedly agree that we just want these things to be business as usual. It's not it's not special. It's not something one has to think about providing. It's something that one does, is there and just happens. That's the kind of end thing we all want, isn't it?
It is, and I think that becomes more and more necessary in as we move more and more into the digital world. And I think it becomes more necessary and more possible. So, I would like to hope that that is the way in which we're moving, and that the pace of that movement increases in the next few years.
Yeah, thank you, Jane. Claire, do we have any questions that we could ask Jane?
We do. Does Crawford Technologies involve itself with standards such as EPUB, incorporating these into its offerings?
So we currently don't do a lot with EPUB, I have to say, although it may be that there is an area in North America where things are being worked on that I'm not aware of. Certainly it's not something that I'm working with on a daily basis in the European market. And I think that's mainly because of the nature of the types of documents, I guess, that we would typically work with. So where Crawford Technologies sits and where our platform sits is in what we call the post-composition space. So you have organizations that produce lots and lots of types of documents, like I say, and they might be transactional, they might be static, or a combination of the two. They tend to be generated in the way they've been but the way that's happened for a number of years, and they may well be generated by other systems like composition engines and stuff like that. And then we sit after that process in order to easily convert those from inaccessible formats, so typically things like standard PDF or print, into accessible versions of those formats. So I guess we're taking something that's either printed on a page or comes in a PDF format and making sure that those are accessible but unaltered. So a PDF, but now an accessible PDF, a printed page, but now a large print page, something like that. So I guess that's probably the lack of involvement in EPUB is potentially because that's not the requirement currently that our customers have. But it's certainly something I will ask and see if I can provide any further information on anything that might be happening down the road that's being developed at the moment, to see if that's something that we are moving into, an area that we are moving into.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's as I say, these developments are interesting, and how they get from or built into different platforms taken up. But there's always something happening. Claire, do we have?
We do. How easy or difficult is it to make changes to any of the software being used by Crawford, taking account of the integrated nature of the products?
So, I'm sorry, Claire, you probably can't clarify this, but so do you mean? So maybe I'll answer the question in both ways. So, I guess it could mean, how easy is it for us to update and evolve our platform, or the other is, how easy is it to make changes to documents within a company? Sorry, just a bit of clarification that I'm thinking about there.
I would take both. What you had in mind. Certainly the I think both, really, Jane. If you could.
Okay. So certainly in terms of our platform, we update our software platforms twice a year. We have standard dates when there are updates done to them. We're constantly sort of evolving. I mean, we own our own intellectual property, and so we're constantly evolving things and upgrading things and updating things, and obviously that's communicated to our existing customers. In terms of how easy it is to make changes to documents from a sort of accessibility point of view within our platforms, I mean, that's what they're designed for. They are designed specifically to take any type of document, or most types of document, let's say, and using sort of either templates or using automation and AI, help organizations to easily convert those en masse into accessible formats. I don't know if that answers a question. If it doesn't, and the person wants to
that's
shoot me another question, that's fine.
No, Jane, that's absolutely fine, because I know one can, you can think that if something needs to be updated because there's a new Braille standard or change to a Braille standard, or something that's already there, how easy, difficult are those things to do? And you hopefully said that you have an update procedure twice a year, to do things like that, and appreciate, obviously, it probably takes quite a lot to push these out across a large area of activity, really, within the platform, and working out all the ramifications and seeing how it all perhaps interlinks with how people are using software and doing things like that. So yeah.
And actually, just thank you for that, because that actually gave me a little bit more clarity in what you said there, Roger. So so in terms of changing standards, a couple of things. So I think I said before that we work with and sit on some of the committees for those standards bodies, and so we are always ahead of those standards in terms of having to update our platform as well. But the beauty, again, of where we sit in the process of document production is that it's very simple to make changes, and in fact that's why a lot of large organizations use us. So it's much easier to, if there's a change, for example, in a standard, it's much easier to make that change upstream from the document composition stage to where we sit. It's much easier to make that change into the thing that's driving the accessible output. So yeah, it's very, very simple to make changes, and like I say, we do update our platforms twice a year.
Jane, thank you very much indeed. Well, in closing, Jane, may I thank you sincerely for sharing your insights about Crawford Technologies, and of course we look forward to a continuing relationship with yourselves, which we greatly value within UKAAF.
Absolutely, we do too.
Thank you. In June, our webinar is going to feature Sharon Williams. Sharon is known, obviously, to many of us. She is Managing Director of Peer and Treasurer of UKAAF. So do join us for that. In closing, may I thank Sue, Claire and Emma for their work behind the scenes. So from us all, goodbye until next time.